My mom laughed when I said I was pregnant. "You're not ready for a child," she said. "You can't even take care of yourself." So I stopped trying to prove myself and proved her wrong instead. When my daughter was born, I mailed her a photo and adoption papers. She'll never meet the baby she doubted. Hello, thank you for your support. This means a lot to us. We're on a journey to our first 100 subscribers. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Amanda Allison from California. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not a confused one, a real laugh. Short, sharp, like the punchline of a joke she didn't have to finish. I still remember the sound of her coffee mug hitting the countertop, ceramic on tile, and how she didn't even look up when she said it. "You? A mom?" She sucked her teeth, shook her head, and went back to scrolling her phone like my life hadn't just cracked open in front of her. "You can't even take care of yourself, sweetheart." The way she said sweetheart made it sound like a punchline too. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there with my coat still on and my fingers clenched around the test I brought to prove it, like she'd believe a stick before she believed me. It wasn't the words that gutted me. It was how ready she was to say them, like she'd been waiting for a moment like this, to finally confirm what she'd always thought of me. Useless. Dramatic. The daughter who never finished anything, who flinched at confrontation, who always had so many emotions. I stood in her kitchen, the one I used to scrub every Saturday as a kid just to earn a compliment, and I realized I could have told her anything, and the answer would have been the same. Pregnant. Can't handle it. Promotion. Must have been a fluke. Engaged. Poor guy. I didn't exist to her as a full person, just a disappointment in waiting. I remember my mouth opening to respond, and nothing came out. That silence burned more than anything I could have said. She didn't ask how I felt. Didn't ask who the father was, or if I was safe, or if I needed help. Just grabbed her bag, muttered something about being late for her nail appointment, and walked out. I was still standing in the middle of the kitchen with 2 pink lines in my pocket, and a nausea rising in my throat that had nothing to do with morning sickness. That's the moment I learned something dangerous. Sometimes, the people who made you think you needed their love to survive were the same ones choking the air out of your lungs. I went back to my apartment that night and laid on my bare mattress, hand on my stomach, and whispered to the quiet, "It's just us now." I didn't tell anyone else. Not my sister. Not the on-again off-again father who'd vanished at the first mention of the word late. Not my coworkers who thought I was just gaining weight. I didn't want advice. I didn't want a baby shower thrown by people who secretly thought I'd fail. I wanted stillness. I wanted to carry this child like a secret weapon. For the first time in my life, I didn't beg anyone to see me. I didn't over-explain or apologize or shrink myself down to make space for someone else's comfort. I grew in silence, my body, my resolve, my sense of what the hell I was capable of. And the louder her words echoed in my head, the quieter I became. I learned to love that quiet. I kept thinking about the time she told me she never wanted kids, but did what she had to do. How she once said, "Mothers don't get to be soft," like gentleness was a weakness. I grew up in a house where affection had to be earned, and even then, it felt like she was doing me a favor. I used to believe that if I did everything right, straight A's, clean room, dinner on the table, I'd finally get a version of her that was warm. That version never came, and standing in her kitchen that day, holding proof of a life I was creating, I realized I had never been the failure. I'd just been measuring myself against someone who couldn't recognize love unless it looked like obedience. That wasn't going to be my daughter's story. I didn't hate her. Not then. Hatred would have meant I still needed her to be something she wasn't. What I felt was colder. I felt clarity, like a fever breaking, like a switch flipping in a room that had been dark for years. I knew right then that this child would not grow up trying to survive me. She would not carry the weight of my sadness like I carried my mother's. She would not be taught that silence meant strength, or that love had to be earned. And most of all, she would never, never hear me laugh at her pain. That was the moment I chose who I was going to be. Not a scared girl with a baby, A woman building a world her child could feel safe in. It started small. I Googled prenatal vitamins and ordered them on payday. I signed up for every free parenting newsletter I could find. I watched birth vlogs with the volume low so I wouldn't wake my neighbor. I whispered apologies to the baby inside me for the things I didn't know yet. I told her stories before bed. I rubbed my belly and said, "You're already more loved than I ever was." I didn't post about it. Didn't update my status. Didn't tell a soul. It was mine. Ours. And in that stillness, I became someone I didn't recognize, but someone I liked. Someone who didn't need to be believed to become real. That was the beginning of my revenge. Not anger. Not spite. Just choosing to become the exact opposite of everything she said I'd be. I didn't pack everything. Just what mattered. The baby clothes I'd folded 100 times without even owning a dresser. The journal I wrote to her in where every page ended with "I'm trying." A picture of me at 5 years old, the last time I remembered feeling safe. I left the rest. Left the apartment I couldn't afford. Left the job where the manager called me sweetie, like he was doing me a favor. Left the voicemail from my mother that I never played. The day I left, the sky looked like old dishwater and I took it as a sign. Not everything has to be bright to be right. I bought a bus ticket under a name I used to doodle in notebooks. No goodbye notes. No forwarding address. Just the sound of the door clicking shut behind me like a chapter closing. The apartment I found was smaller than I'd hoped, but I didn't need hope. I needed quiet. It had roaches, creaky plumbing, and a landlord who only responded when rent was late, but it was mine. I taped a towel over the cracked window and pushed my twin mattress into the corner. The first night there, I listened to the walls breathe around me, to the distant sounds of a couple fighting 2 doors down. I curled up with both hands on my stomach and whispered, "No one here will tell you you're a mistake." My phone buzzed all night. My mother, my sister, the ex who only showed up when silence made him nervous. I turned it off. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. I needed to disappear from them before I disappeared from myself. In the mornings, I threw up with the dedication of a ritual. I'd hold the rim of the toilet like a prayer and try to breathe through it. Some days, that nausea was the only thing reminding me that I wasn't alone. I started working at a diner 3 blocks away. Cash tips and long hours, where no one asked questions unless you were 5 minutes late. I kept a rubber band around my wrist to snap every time I caught myself thinking about my mother. I counted change in the back room with trembling hands, wiped down booths with fingers that smelled like bleach, and said, "Thank you, have a nice day," with a kind of robotic precision that no one ever questioned. They didn't know I was growing a universe under my apron, and I liked it that way. At night, I researched everything. Birthing positions, cloth diapers, how to breathe through a contraction. I watched mothers on YouTube pack hospital bags with confidence I envied. I made lists. Hospital list, baby bag list, emergency contact list with every name crossed out. I practiced saying "we're fine" in the mirror until I believed it. I learned to ration groceries and turn 1 box of pasta into 3 meals. I found a second-hand crib on Craigslist and hauled it home piece by piece in the rain. My feet were always swollen, my back screamed with every step, and still, no one knew. Not one person. And in that invisibility, I discovered something close to power. I wasn't asking to be seen anymore. I was choosing to stay hidden. Sometimes I'd imagine running into her, my mother, on the street. Would she recognize me? Would she even look up from her phone? I'd picture the scene like a movie. She gasps, tries to touch my stomach, asks me why I left. And in my mind, I always say the same thing. Because you never made room for me. So I made one without you. But real life isn't like that. Real life is folding baby clothes at midnight. Your knees aching from the floor, knowing that the person who raised you wouldn't even recognize the woman you've become. I stopped checking her social media. Stopped hoping she'd reach out with anything other than shame. The space between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was a choice. One night, I sat on the fire escape watching the windows across the street flicker on and off. My ankles were the size of grapefruits, and I had a cold I couldn't shake. I looked up at the sky and said, "If you're listening, just let her arrive safe." I didn't ask for money. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I just wanted her to make it here, breathing whole. I realized I didn't need anyone to believe in me. I just needed the baby to believe that I wanted her. That she wasn't a mistake, wasn't a punishment, wasn't another chance to fail. Every breath I took was a promise. I will not abandon you the way I was abandoned while standing in the same room as the person who birthed me. The silence started to feel like sanctuary. There were no surprise visits, no backhanded compliments, no one telling me to calm down, or that I was being too emotional. Just me, the baby, and the rhythm of surviving. I made peace with the fact that the baby's father wasn't coming back, that he would miss the first kicks, and the sound of her heartbeat on the monitor, that he'd never see how my stomach moved when she shifted at night. And strangely, that didn't break me. It focused me. I wasn't doing this for anyone else anymore. Not to prove I could. Not to prove them wrong. I was doing it because she deserved someone who would choose her every day. And I deserved to become someone who could. I stopped counting days. Time started to stretch and fold around feedings and appointments and bills. I began to recognize the sound of my own strength. Not loud, not angry, just relentless. I found a free clinic with a nurse who smiled with her whole face. I let her hold my hand during the ultrasound, the first time anyone touched me with tenderness in months. I asked the baby, "Can you feel how hard I'm trying?" And in that moment, with a tiny blur moving on the screen, I knew the answer. She could. She would. And someday, she'd know what it cost me to carry her in silence. But first, I had to survive the waiting. The day I heard her heartbeat for the first time, something ancient in me cracked open. Not like glass, not like something breaking, but like a fault line that had always been there finally shifting. The sound wasn't pretty. It was wild, fast, messy, like a gallop in the dark. And I remember thinking, that's her fighting to be here. I walked home after that appointment in the rain, clutching the sonogram picture like it was sacred scripture. And for the first time since the test turned positive, I allowed myself to smile. Not because everything was okay. Nothing was okay. But because something inside me was starting to believe I could do this. Not just survive it. Raise her. Hold her in my arms one day and say, "You are safe. You are wanted. You are mine." There's a strength that comes when no one is clapping. No audience, no applause, just sweat and quiet, and the slow grind of doing what must be done. I worked through the third trimester on swollen feet, my belly brushing against counters, customers pretending not to notice. I learned how to breathe through Braxton Hicks contractions while wiping tables. I taught myself how to budget down to the nickel, to stretch a bag of rice into 5 dinners. I became a scavenger, a strategist. Baby clothes from donation bins. Free formula samples claimed under fake email addresses. When I finally built the crib, alone on a Tuesday night with swollen hands and YouTube tutorials, I sat beside it on the floor and whispered, "I am not unfit. I am unfed. And there's a difference." I started writing her letters. Not the cutesy kind. Raw ones. Honest ones. I told her about the time I cried behind the restaurant's freezer because a customer called me slow. I told her how I'd once skipped dinner to afford her vitamins. I told her how no one held my hand at the anatomy scan, but that I pretended she could feel the pressure from the inside. I told her she was the first thing I'd ever fought for without apology. Each letter ended the same way. "I love you more than she ever loved me." I never said my mother's name. It was my own small rebellion. She didn't deserve a presence in these pages. She didn't deserve to live inside our future. There were nights I didn't sleep. Nights I stared at the ceiling with one hand on my stomach, and the other wrapped around fear like it was a second heartbeat. I was terrified I wouldn't know how to love her right. That I'd pass down the wrong silences, the wrong kinds of absence. That I'd look at her one day and see my mother in my own reflection. But fear is a cruel prophet. It shows you only what could go wrong, never what might be made right. So I started small. Every morning I sang to her. Every night, I rubbed cocoa butter over the stretch marks like they were sacred scars. I reminded her out loud, "I'm still here. I'm staying. I'm trying." And I meant every word. Sometimes when I folded her onesies or packed her hospital bag, I imagined what it would be like if my mother had shown up. Just walked through the door and sat on the floor next to me. No speeches. No apologies. Just her present. I think part of me still craved that fantasy, someone older, wiser saying, "You've got this and I've got you." But that moment never came. And eventually I stopped wishing for it. I became that person for myself. And in doing so I realized the truth. You don't always heal by being held. Sometimes you heal by holding. by creating the love you were denied, by refusing to hand down your pain like an heirloom. The clinic nurse gave me a baby carrier someone had donated. It smelled like baby powder and cigarette smoke, but I cried anyway when she handed it to me. People underestimate the power of a woman who's been ignored. We learn to survive on crumbs and then build whole homes out of them. I spent evenings practicing how to strap the carrier around my torso, imagining her weight against my chest. I memorized lullabies, even the second verses. I learned how to sterilize bottles, how to install the car seat, how to breathe through contractions even when no one would be in the delivery room but me and a stranger in scrubs. I was becoming the mother she said I couldn't be, slowly, quietly, irrevocably. The baby kicked hardest when I read aloud, especially poetry. I started reciting Maya Angelou, Adrienne Rich, and random lines I scribbled on napkins during lunch breaks. I think she liked the sound of my voice when it wasn't flattened by shame. I liked it too. For the first time I wasn't shrinking. I was expanding, becoming. And with every shift in my body, every groan and stretch and ache, I felt myself leave behind the girl who once asked for her mother's love like it was water. I no longer needed her to believe in me. I had a heartbeat inside me doing that already. And that heartbeat was louder than every insult, every doubt, every dismissive laugh I'd ever swallowed. One night, I held the sonogram against my chest and cried for all the versions of me that never made it this far. The 10-year-old who cleaned the whole house just to hear "good job." The teenager who stopped telling stories because no one listened. The 20-year-old who thought love meant endurance. They all lived inside me like ghosts, whispering "you're not enough." And I whispered back, "Watch me." That was the night I stopped waiting for my mother to show up in the past and started showing up for myself in the present. I wasn't a broken girl with a baby anymore. I was a woman with a daughter. And that distinction would mean everything. She was born in silence. No father pacing in the hallway. No mother crying beside my bed. Just me, soaked in sweat and lightheaded from hours of labor, staring down at a tiny face that somehow already looked like she belonged to herself. Her fists were clenched, her mouth wide with a scream that shattered something in me. Something I didn't know needed breaking. When the nurse placed her on my chest, I didn't cry. I laughed. A low, tired, almost delirious laugh that spilled out of me like breath finally released. She's real, I thought. Not a plan, not a fear, not a dream. Flesh. Heat. A second heartbeat outside of my body. I remember whispering, "We made it." And she blinked up at me like she already knew. They offered to call someone for me. Family? Friend? Father? I shook my head each time, too tired to explain that some people don't have a village, they build one. One nurse hovered longer than the others, concern etched across her face like maybe she thought I was too alone. But alone isn't the same as abandoned. I signed every form, answered every question, fed her with trembling hands while the hospital lights flickered like bad omens. I was exhausted, sore in places I didn't know could ache. But I held her with a kind of certainty I hadn't felt since childhood. It wasn't bliss. It was duty. It was devotion. It was the kind of love that comes not from romance or instinct but choice. Over and over again I had chosen her. 3 days later I was discharged.
No balloons.
No welcome baby banner. Just a cab ride home with a second-hand car seat and a bag of formula samples. She slept the whole way, her head bobbing with each pothole, her mouth in that perfect newborn pout. I stared out the window and felt something bitter rise in my chest, not toward her, but toward everyone who had let us arrive at this moment alone. Toward the people who could have shown up, who could have cared, who could have said, "I'm proud of you." But pride was a language I'd had to teach myself. And now, holding my daughter like a fragile secret, I realized I no longer needed it from anyone else. That was the day I knew it was time. I printed the photo at a Walgreens. Just one. No editing, no filter. Just me and the baby, a few hours old, her face red and wrinkled, my eyes swollen but clear. I chose that photo on purpose. I wanted her to see it raw. No glamour. No posed smiles. Just proof. Proof that despite everything, despite her laughter and her disbelief and her silence, I had done the one thing she said I couldn't. I took a pen and wrote on the back, "Her name is not yours to know." 7 words. Sharp as knives. Then I folded the adoption papers. Not legal ones, not real. Just symbolic. A blank template I'd found online with her name crossed out where the emergency contact should go. It wasn't for the courts. It was for me. I mailed it without a return address. Just dropped the envelope into the blue box on the corner and walked away. The wind was sharp that morning. My daughter was strapped to my chest, swaddled tight, her cheek resting against my collarbone. I remember thinking how strange it was that a single act could feel so final, so freeing, and so cruel all at once. But cruelty isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just absence. Sometimes it's deciding who doesn't get to witness the beauty they refuse to believe in. As I walked back to our apartment, I felt lighter. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. That envelope wasn't revenge. It was release. I wasn't waiting anymore. The text started that evening. From my sister. From a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. And then finally from her. No words. Just a series of question marks. Then is this real? Then what have you done? And finally call me. I stared at the screen, my daughter sleeping beside me, and realized how little I felt. No spike of adrenaline. No satisfaction. Just a calm I had never known with her. I turned the phone over and let it ring itself out. I didn't owe her an explanation. She hadn't asked for one when she dismissed my entire future in one sentence. She didn't deserve an audience now that the show had gone on without her. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. More messages. One read, "You're being dramatic." Another, "This isn't fair. I'm still your mother." That one made me laugh. Fair. Like fairness ever applied to me. Like fairness was something I'd been raised on. I remembered being 13 and getting my period for the first time in a gas station bathroom because she forgot to pick me up from school. I remembered her saying, "Stop being so emotional," when I told her I thought I was depressed. Fair. My daughter would never know that kind of ache. She'd never have to wonder if my silence meant rejection. She would know always where she stood with me. She'd never mistake criticism for care. The last message I read before blocking her simply said, "I hope she hates you one day like I hate my mother." That one sat with me. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed everything. She was never afraid that I'd fail. She was afraid I'd succeed without her. That I'd break the cycle. That I'd become something she could never claim. And she was right. I was doing it. Every diaper changed, every bottle warmed, every lullaby sung in the middle of the night. I was doing it without her. And the silence she left behind was no longer empty. It was full of everything I had built in her absence. I was not her daughter anymore. I was someone's mother. She showed up 6 weeks later. No warning. No call. No heads up through my sister or a neighbor or some mutual cousin trying to play peacemaker. Just a knock. Sharp. Quick. The kind that pretends patience but carries urgency. I had just laid my daughter down, her tiny fist still curled near her chin, her breath soft with sleep. I watched the rise and fall of her chest once more before moving toward the door. The peephole gave me a view I hadn't seen in nearly a year. My mother standing with perfect posture, lips pursed, face composed in that smug mask she wore to funerals and job interviews. For a long moment I didn't breathe. Just stared. It felt like time had reversed and spat me out right into my old self, until I blinked and realized I wasn't her anymore. When I opened the door I didn't step aside. I stayed in the frame, one hand braced on the knob, the other clenched behind my back like I needed to anchor myself to something invisible. Her eyes flickered past me, over my shoulder, like she had the right to scan the inside of my life. She smelled like department store perfume and freshly brewed judgment. "I came to meet my granddaughter," she said, as if that explained everything. As if she hadn't laughed when I told her I was pregnant. As if she hadn't vanished when I needed her most. She reached into her bag like she was about to pull out a gift. I brought something for her, but I cut her off with the softest word I've ever weaponized. No, at first, she blinked like she hadn't heard me. Then she smiled tight, forced, polite. "I don't think you understand. I'm her grandmother. This isn't just about you anymore." Her tone dropped into the one she used when I was younger and dared to say no. The one that carried more warning than threat, more expectation than empathy. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then I said, "You don't get to rewrite yourself into a story you tried to end." Her face cracked then, not dramatically, not enough to feel victorious, but just enough to see the disbelief thread into her expression. Like I was supposed to break first. Like I was supposed to need her to be kind before I could be strong. I made mistakes, she said finally, the gift still clenched in her hand, unopened. But I was scared for you. You weren't ready. And I was trying to protect you from making a mess you couldn't clean up. Her voice softened, almost cracked. But I didn't move. I thought about the night I slept sitting up on the floor because I couldn't afford a crib yet. The morning I walked to the clinic with blood running down my legs, thinking I was losing the baby, and no one to call. The nights I whispered lullabies into the dark, not knowing if I'd have enough formula to get through the week. Protection? No. What she did wasn't fear. It was abandonment dressed as wisdom. It was cruelty with lipstick on. She has a mother, I said, voice low, calm, steady. She doesn't need you. The silence that followed was thick. She looked at me like I had just shoved her off a cliff. You're punishing me, she said, and there it was, the line I'd been waiting for. The delusion that made her the victim in a narrative she never cared to understand. I'm not punishing you, I replied. I'm protecting her. I stepped out just enough to close the door halfway between us. You didn't believe in me. That's fine. But you don't get to reap what you refuse to sow. Her hand twitched like she wanted to reach out, and for one moment I saw her mouth tremble. Maybe she thought tears would fix what silence had shattered. But I'd learned better. I could have helped, she said, her voice barely a whisper now. You didn't let me. I let out a laugh, short, breathless, hollow. You think help comes after the storm? After the baby's here, after the work's been done, after the proof's undeniable? That's not help. That's cleanup. That's you wanting to be seen as something you never were. I didn't need to scream. My calm was louder than anything rage could have managed. I looked her in the eye then, not as a daughter begging for something, but as a woman who had built a world without her. You lost your place at the table when you left me standing in your kitchen, holding a pregnancy test like it meant nothing. She stepped back, maybe for air, maybe because something finally clicked. I watched her try to assemble the pieces of a version of me that no longer existed. I wasn't the girl who over-explained, who chased, who apologized for needing too much. I was the woman who had stayed up every night, whispering love into the ears of someone too small to understand the depth of it yet. I was the mother who had made this child feel wanted from the first breath. And when my own mother looked at me, I saw it hit her. She wasn't needed here. Not now. Maybe not ever. I hope someday you'll change your mind, she said, voice brittle like glass. I tilted my head. I already did. And then without drama, without cruelty, I closed the door. No slam. Just the sound of a line being drawn. On the other side of that wood, she stood still for a moment. I heard her exhale. Heard her footsteps retreat. And then silence. Real complete silence. I leaned against the door and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. In the other room, my daughter stirred. I went to her, picked her up, pressed my face to her soft, warm cheek. And in that moment I knew. I had just chosen her over the girl who used to beg for scraps. And it was the easiest decision I'd ever made. After she left, there was no immediate rage.
No loud aftermath.
Just a strange stillness that felt less like peace, and more like the quiet you get after a building collapses. Dust still in the air, but nothing left to crumble. I kept waiting for something to rise inside me, regret, guilt, doubt, but it never came. I fed my daughter. I washed the bottles. I swept the floors. And the whole time I kept thinking that was the last time. The last time she would stand on my doorstep and pretend the past hadn't happened. The last time she would expect access without atonement. The last time I'd feel that flicker of obligation when I saw her face. I didn't feel victorious. I felt emptied in the best way, like I had finally burned through the last of what she left behind. The messages didn't stop though. Not right away. My sister texted me a screenshot of a post from our mother's Facebook page. A black and white stock photo of a woman holding a baby, captioned with, "Some wounds take years to heal. Don't wait too long to forgive." It got 17 likes. A few hearts. One comment from our aunt that said, "You're so strong, sis. She'll come around." I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because it hurt, but because it was proof of how well my mother knew how to manipulate a story when she was the one holding the pen. There was no mention of abandonment. No context. Just a performance of pain, wrapped in pastel filters and pity. I didn't respond. I just deleted the screenshot. and blocked her number for good. But the fallout wasn't just digital. There were real-world echoes too. My cousin Mariah, who hadn't spoken to me in years, sent a voice memo. "I'm not taking sides, but I just think every kid deserves a grandma, you know?" I laughed when I heard it. Out loud. It was the first time I realized how ridiculous it all sounded when you stripped it down. As if any grandmother would do. As if titles were magic. As if my daughter should be handed over to someone who couldn't hold me. I thought about all the women in my family who had carried wounds like heirlooms. My mother hated her mother. My grandmother blamed hers. A whole lineage of women trying to survive each other. I wasn't trying to end the story. I was trying to rewrite it. Some nights, I lay beside my daughter and stared at the ceiling, wondering what she'd ask me one day. Why didn't I have a grandma? Did I ever meet her? Was she nice? And I knew that I'd have to find a way to answer without poisoning her roots. That's the hardest part of healing. Not letting your pain rot what you grow next. But I also knew this: she would never feel what I felt. She'd never stand in a room full of family and still feel alone. Never shrink under the weight of someone's disappointment masquerading as love. I was raising her in a home where no meant no. Where love wasn't currency. Where apologies weren't transactions. A home where being a child didn't mean being small in someone else's shadow. People kept asking what happened. Did you two have a fight? She really can't see the baby? Isn't that a bit extreme? But no one had been there in that kitchen. No one had heard the way she laughed. No one had felt the cold weight of that dismissal settle in their chest like stone. The worst betrayals aren't the ones people can see. They're the quiet ones. The ones that come from the people who should have known better. So I stopped explaining. Stopped defending. If they couldn't see the crater she left behind, they didn't deserve the story of how I crawled out of it. I wasn't being cold. I was being careful. There's a difference. And only those who've been burned know how to make that distinction. The neighborhood began to recognize me not as the girl with the baby, but as her mother. That word changed everything. Mother. It wrapped around me like armor and softened every bruise at the same time. The woman at the corner store started keeping extra formula behind the counter, just in case. The landlord fixed my heater without me asking. Small things. Nothing life-changing. But enough to feel the shift. I was no longer invisible. I had presence. And the more I stood inside that presence, the more I understood. My power had never been in proving her wrong. It had always been in refusing to let her be right. One afternoon I found a package on my doorstep. No return label. Inside, a knitted blanket in soft gray yarn, and a card that said, "Thought you might need this. No pressure." My mother's handwriting. I didn't touch the blanket. Didn't even lift it out of the box. I stood there in the doorway, staring at it like it might bite. And then calmly, I picked up the whole thing, walked it to the dumpster, and tossed it in. Not because I was angry. Because I was done. Done pretending that softness made up for silence. That presence equaled presence. That gestures could replace responsibility. I closed the door, locked it, and sat beside my daughter, who was giggling at the sound of her own hiccups. And just like that, the past lost its voice in our home. I don't remember the last message she sent before I blocked her. Something about how I was turning my daughter against her. As if silence could be taught. As if absence was a virus that passed from one generation to the next. I didn't respond. I just watched the screen dim, knowing that whatever she wanted now, access, redemption, proximity, it was too late. Not because I hated her. Not because I wanted her to suffer. But because trust doesn't regenerate after decay. And she'd let it rot too long. She wouldn't get to say she was there. Not to her friends. Not to my sister. Not to herself. She would grow old with the kind of ache that doesn't heal. The ache of being permanently unwelcome in the only story she ever tried to erase before it started. She started sending letters next. Handwritten. Always in blue ink. One every month. I didn't read them. Just noted the return address and placed each one in a shoebox in the back of my closet like archived apologies. I didn't owe myself the pain of revisiting. The third one came with a photo. Her, standing in front of a garden she never tended to when I lived at home. She wrote on the back, "Maybe one day she can plant something with me." I laughed, but not in bitterness. It was a soft, private kind of laugh. She really thought being a grandmother was a role she could audition for after missing the entire play. Like she hadn't booed from the front row. Like she hadn't walked out at intermission. Like a child's love was some nostalgic do-over for all the things you broke and never rebuilt. I didn't tell my daughter anything. Not yet. She was still too young to understand the way people weaponize love. I kept her world small, safe, full of yes and earned boundaries. She grew fast. Learned her first words before 18 months. Said mama, like it was the most natural sound in the world. Her hair was thicker than mine, her eyes deeper, darker, always watching. Sometimes I caught her staring at me the way I once stared at my mother, searching for something I couldn't name. But where I had found absence, she found attention. I didn't flinch when she cried. I didn't withhold when she needed me. I gave her everything I had, not because I wanted to prove anything but because I finally had something worth giving. And I gave it freely. Years passed like film slides. Toddler tantrums, scraped knees, lunchboxes with handwritten notes, tiny shoes abandoned at the front door. I became known at the school. The teacher who stayed for every parent conference, the one who made costumes for the fall play. I built the life I never had, brick by stubborn brick. Sometimes I wondered if she heard about it. If someone mentioned us in passing, said, "You should see your daughter with that little girl, she's amazing." I imagined her smile tightening, her voice low. She always was dramatic. That was the thing with women like her. They didn't miss the people they hurt. They missed the control, the revision, the image of themselves as forgivable. But I had taken that away. Quietly. Completely. She started aging in pictures. I'd see them when someone forgot I had her blocked, and tagged us both in a family post. Her hair grayer now, eyes duller, makeup heavier like it could hold her together. In one photo, she was holding a friend's baby. The caption read, "Nothing like the joy of little ones." It didn't sting. It just felt sad. Because that's all she had now, borrowed babies. Stories she had to embellish. Memories she had to lie about to survive. She would never hold mine. She would never smell her hair after bath time, or hear her belly laugh at some silly cartoon. She would never see her dance in the living room, or fall asleep with her cheek pressed to my arm. These were sacred things, and she had chosen not to earn them. Once my daughter asked, "Why don't we go to Nana's house like Sasha does?" I was stirring soup, and for a moment my hands froze. I turned and crouched beside her. "Because not every grown-up knows how to be kind," I said. "And it's my job to keep you close to the ones who do." She nodded like she understood. Kids don't need the whole story. They just need consistency, safety, love that doesn't make them question their worth. Later that night, I lay in bed wondering how many versions of me had longed for that same simplicity. How many times I tried to explain away her cruelty to myself, to others. But there was no poetry in what she did.
No misunderstood matriarchs.
Just a woman who chose to vanish the moment I needed her to look me in the eye and say, "I believe you can do this." Sometimes I dream she showed up again, older, softer, friendlier. She'd knock on the door and this time she'd cry. She'd say all the things I wanted her to say when I was 19. I was scared. I didn't know how to be a mother. I projected my pain onto you. In the dream I never let her in. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to anymore. That's what scared her the most, I think. That I healed in her absence. That I built something beautiful and didn't leave a door open for her to come back and name it. And the truth is, she would die wondering. Wondering if my daughter ever asked about her. Wondering if she had left even a sliver of a legacy that survived her. She hadn't. And that was by design. The night before her 5th birthday, I found myself awake at the kitchen table long after the candles had been blown out and the dishes washed. She'd fallen asleep clutching a plush rabbit I'd sewn from old fabric scraps. Her fingers curled around its ears like they were made of gold. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me ache with loneliness but now felt earned, like a hush you guard with your life. I sat there staring at the half-eaten cake and thought, this is the life I built from the pieces she said would never be enough. 5 years. 5 whole years of laughter, tantrums, morning cuddles, scraped knees, whispered bedtime songs, and never, not once, regret. Only the sharp, steady knowledge that every time I said no to my mother, I was saying yes to something better. The letter came 3 days later. No return address this time. Just my name, printed in a hand that had grown shakier. Inside, no apology.
No ownership.
Just a single line scribbled onto a plain piece of paper. I hope you tell her I tried. I stared at it for a long time. That word tried scratched at something in me. Tried what? To dismiss me? To gaslight me? To rewrite the story from the outside in? Trying isn't a silent phone. Trying isn't laughter at a pregnancy announcement. Trying isn't abandonment dressed in conditional affection. But maybe in her mind, withholding love had been her version of trying. Maybe she really believed toughening me up was the same thing as raising me. That realization didn't soften anything. But it did offer something better: closure. Not the kind where you feel warm and forgiving. The kind where you no longer care what someone else believes about their role in your survival. I folded the letter in half and slid it into the same shoebox that held all the others. Then I locked it in the back of my closet, high on the shelf where my daughter couldn't reach. Not because I wanted to hide the truth from her, but because truth has its time. And I'd made a promise, to myself and to her, that her childhood wouldn't be cluttered by the ghosts of mine. She would learn about pain in her own ways, in her own time. But not through me. I would not pass her the bitter spoon I had been forced to swallow. I would feed her what I never had: peace, predictability, and love that didn't threaten to vanish when she disappointed me. And when she was older, if she asked, I would tell her the truth. Not all women are meant to be mothers, even if they give birth. That summer, she started asking deeper questions. About families. About why some kids had 2 grandparents at the school picnic, and some had none. One afternoon, as we sat on the park bench eating melting popsicles, she turned to me and asked, "Did you have a mommy like I have you?" I didn't hesitate. I said I had a mommy, yes. But she didn't know how to love out loud. Her brow furrowed, the way it always did when she was thinking too hard. "What does that mean?" she asked. I looked out at the playground, at the kids spinning wildly on the carousel, shrieking with joy. Then I looked back at her. "It means she loved in a way that hurt more than it helped. And I decided you wouldn't grow up wondering if you were enough." She nodded like she understood, even if she didn't yet. And then just like that, she asked for another popsicle. Grief didn't come all at once. It came in strange little visits. Like when she lost her first tooth and reached under the pillow, beaming with wonder. Or when she won a ribbon for her drawing of a rocket ship family. One parent, one child, flying through stars together. Moments when I thought, she should have seen this. Not because I wanted my mother there, but because I wanted to be the kind of person who could want her there. That's what grief is sometimes. Mourning not just what was, but what never could be. Still, I never invited her in. Not through guilt. Not through nostalgia. Not through holidays that begged for reconciliation. I had learned that love isn't an open door. It's a locked one, handed a key only when someone earns it. And she never did. When the call came, years later, long after the letter stopped, I let it ring. Then I listened to the voicemail once, just once. A relative I barely spoke to. Flat voice. Short message. "She passed this morning. Thought you should know." That was it. No funeral details. No request for reconciliation. Just the end. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the quiet settle in like fog. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief. What I felt was something weightless. Like a thread had finally snapped that I hadn't realized I was still tugging on. And when my daughter walked in, asking if I wanted to play go fish, I stood up without a word and followed her. That's the moment I knew. Whatever tether had kept me checking the mailbox, scanning my blocked messages, wondering if I'd one day feel different, it was gone. I didn't keep my daughter from her grandmother. I kept her safe. There's a difference. And maybe one day she'll stand at her own threshold, older, wiser, maybe bruised, and realize that protection doesn't always look like open arms. Sometimes it looks like locked doors. Like quiet birthdays with people who showed up. Like parents who say no to toxicity even when it's family. She won't have to unlearn the things I did. She won't have to spend years rebuilding a sense of worth that was never watered. She'll have a foundation. She'll know what love feels like when it doesn't come with splinters. And I'll know that the bloodline broke with me. Not in bitterness. In mercy. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who understands what it means to protect your peace at all costs. Subscribe for more emotionally charged, slow-burn stories about quiet strength, personal justice, and the kind of closure that doesn't ask for permission. See you soon in our next story.